Is there anything else I can get you, sir?
Yeah, a waitress who doesn't stink like the gutter. Back off, monkey.
What did you just call me?
You deaf too, monkey? Now fetch my drink. And wags your tail.
Fetch it yourself. I'm done serving you.
You little black cockroach. You don't say no to me.
I just did.
Fight back, little girl. Scream. Cry. Do something.
Her body shook, her vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. Then her breathing slowed, her fingers uncurled, and 15 years of Krav Maga woke up all at once. The last table of the night wanted extra lemon wedges. Whitney Torres carried them over on a small plate, smiled, and disappeared back behind the bar before the woman could finish saying thank you. That was what Whitney did best. Disappear. The Meridian sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue and East Walton, the kind of Chicago restaurant where a glass of wine cost more than Whitney's hourly wage. White tablecloths, dim amber lighting, jazz trickling from hidden speakers like expensive perfume. The clientele came in cashmere and Italian leather, and they expected their servers to move like shadows, present when needed, invisible when not. Whitney had perfected that trick over 4 years. 28 years old, 5'6", a lean frame that her black uniform hung on like it was tailored, though it came off a rack in the back office. She wore her hair pulled tight in a low bun, no jewelry except a thin silver chain her mother gave her at 16. She spoke softly. She moved quickly. She never complained. The kitchen staff called her Ghost. Not to be cruel, they meant it as a compliment. She could weave through a packed dining room carrying 4 plates without brushing a single elbow. She could clear a table in under 90 seconds. She could sense when a guest's water glass hit the halfway mark from across the room and refill it before they noticed. "Whitney's got that radar," said Tomas, the bartender, one Thursday evening. He was watching her glide between tables during the dinner rush. "I swear she's got eyes in the back of her head." What Tomas didn't notice, what nobody at the Meridian ever noticed, were her hands. The palms carried ridges of hardened skin, calluses that no amount of restaurant work could produce. The knuckles were slightly thickened, not swollen, but dense. The kind of hands that had struck hard surfaces thousands of times. And the way she walked. Most servers shuffled or hurried, their weight high in their chests, leaning forward into the next task. Whitney moved from her hips, low center of gravity, each step deliberate, balanced, as if the floor beneath her might shift without warning and she needed to be ready. One night in March, a busboy named Derek tripped near the kitchen door. A tray of champagne flutes launched into the air, 6 glasses tumbling in slow motion toward the tile floor. Whitney was 3 feet away. Her arms shot out. She caught the tray with one hand, the other hand snatching a glass that had already separated from the pack. Not a drop spilled. The whole thing took less than a second. Derek stared at her. "How did you—" "Lucky catch." She handed the tray back and kept walking. Later, Tomas leaned over the bar. "Nice reflexes, Ghost." Whitney shrugged. "Just paying attention." She clocked out at 11:15, changed in the staff bathroom, and walked 6 blocks to the L station. The March wind cut through her jacket. She didn't hunch against it. She walked upright, scanning the sidewalk ahead, checking reflections in store windows without turning her head. At home, a small 1-bedroom in Bronzeville, she hung her uniform, ate leftover rice and beans standing at the counter, and set her alarm for 5 a.m. Not for the restaurant. The restaurant didn't open until 11. The 5 a.m. alarm was for something else entirely, something she'd been doing 6 days a week for 15 years, something that had turned a frightened 13-year-old girl into whatever she was now. This quiet, watchful woman who caught champagne flutes out of the air and walked through dark streets without fear. But nobody at the Meridian knew about that. To them, she was just Whitney, the quiet one, the ghost. They had no idea what lived inside that silence. Whitney Torres was 13 the first time she understood what helpless meant. It was a Tuesday in October, South Side Chicago. She was walking home from school with her mother, Gloria, cutting through the parking lot behind the laundromat on 63rd Street. The sun was already going down. The air smelled like exhaust and cold concrete. Two men came from behind the dumpster. One grabbed Gloria's purse. When she held on, the second one hit her across the face with something hard. Whitney never saw what, and Gloria dropped to the asphalt like her bones had turned to water. Whitney screamed. She screamed until her throat tore. She threw her backpack at them. She swung her fists at the air because they were already gone, already running, already around the corner with $40 and a phone that didn't even work half the time. Gloria spent 3 days in the hospital, fractured cheekbone, concussion. The police took a report. Nobody was ever caught. On the 4th day, Gloria came home with her jaw wired shut and a piece of paper in her hand. An address, a name. Eli Whitman, former Krav Maga instructor for the Israel Defense Forces, retired to Chicago. Ran a small gym above a hardware store in Bridgeport. No sign on the door, no website, just a concrete staircase and a room that smelled like sweat and old mats. Gloria couldn't talk through the wires, so she wrote on a notepad and held it up for Whitney to read. "You will never feel like I felt. Not ever." Whitney walked up those stairs the next afternoon. She was 5'0", 90 pounds. Her hands shook the whole way up. Eli was 62. Short, built like a fire hydrant. He watched this skinny kid standing in his doorway, backpack still on, eyes red from crying she wouldn't admit to. "You want to learn to fight?" he asked. "I want to learn to make it stop," she said. He stared at her for a long time. Then he nodded once and pointed to the mat. That was 15 years ago. Whitney trained 6 days a week, before school, after school, summers, holidays, through growth spurts that made her clumsy and teenage years that made her angry and college semesters that made her exhausted. She trained through all of it. Krav Maga wasn't pretty. It wasn't choreographed. It was built for one thing, ending a threat as fast as possible. Eli taught her to strike first and strike hard, to use elbows, knees, headbutts, to turn an attacker's weight against them, to fight in tight spaces, in the dark, against bigger opponents, against multiple opponents. By 18, she had her black belt. By 21, she was Eli's assistant instructor, teaching Saturday morning classes to women from the neighborhood. Nurses, teachers, single mothers, girls who reminded her of herself at 13. Eli had one rule he repeated every single session. You don't fight to hurt, you fight to stop. The moment the threat is over, your hands go down. Understand? Whitney understood. She'd never been in a real fight, not once in 15 years. She'd never had to use what she knew outside of the gym. She trained like her life depended on it, but she lived like it never would. She kept it quiet. No social media posts. No competition trophies on the shelf. Her co-workers at the Meridian knew nothing. Her friends knew she worked out a lot. That was it. She wasn't hiding. She just didn't see the point of advertising. The skills lived in her body, in the way she moved, the way she balanced, the way her hands stayed loose and ready at her sides without her even thinking about it. 15 years of training folded into muscle and bone, waiting in silence. She figured it would stay that way forever. Saturday night at the Meridian, every table full, the bar 3 deep, jazz playing louder than usual to cover the noise. Whitney was working the east section. 8 tables, mostly couples and small groups, easy rotation. A good night, the kind where tips added up and the hours moved fast. At 9:14, the front door opened and the temperature in the room dropped. 6 men walked in. They didn't wait to be seated. They didn't check the reservation book. They walked straight to the corner booth, the big one, the one management kept open on Saturday nights just in case, and sat down like they owned the building. The one in front was Vincent Calloway. Everybody in Chicago knew Vincent Calloway the way everybody knows a storm warning. You didn't need the details, you just knew to stay inside. He ran the South Side's biggest loan sharking operation. He had his hands in drugs, in protection rackets, in construction kickbacks. 3 assault charges, all dropped. 2 witnesses against him in a racketeering case, both recanted. The police didn't avoid him because they couldn't touch him. They avoided him because the ones who tried ended up transferred, threatened, or worse. He was 46, 6'3", 240 pounds of bulk that hadn't seen a gym in years, but still carried the density of a man who'd grown up fighting. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, gold rings on 3 fingers, and a watch that cost more than Whitney's annual salary. His head was shaved clean. His eyes were the color of wet cement, flat, bored, calculating. Behind him, Ray Dawson, Vincent's right hand, former bouncer, former boxer, current enforcer, built like a refrigerator with a shaved head and hands the size of dinner plates. The other 4 were muscle, interchangeable, thick-necked, quiet. They settled into the booth. Vincent snapped his fingers twice without looking up. Greg Patterson, the floor manager, materialized instantly. Whitney watched from the service station as Greg bent at the waist, nodding, smiling, his body language shrinking with every second he stood at that table. When he walked back, his face was gray. "Whitney, table 12. "That's not my section." "It is now." Greg wouldn't meet her eyes. "Just keep them happy, whatever they want." "Greg, I've seen that guy on the news. I know what he is. Just smile and get through the night, please." She picked up 6 menus and walked over. Vincent didn't look at the menu. He looked at her, slowly, starting at her shoes and working up the way you'd inspect something at an auction. The men around him noticed. A couple of them smirked. "Well," he leaned back and tilted his chin, "they got a pretty one tonight." The table chuckled. Ray Dawson didn't laugh. He just watched, arms crossed, scanning the room out of habit. "Good evening," Whitney said. Her voice was level, professional. "Can I start you with drinks?" "Bourbon, Woodford, neat, for the table." Vincent was still looking at her. "And sweetheart, turn around for me." "I'm sorry?" "I said turn around, slowly. I want to see the whole package before I decide if you stay." The table laughed again. A woman at the next booth glanced over, then quickly looked away. Whitney felt the heat rise in her neck but kept her expression neutral. 15 years of discipline held her jaw in place. "I'll get those bourbons started." She turned and walked back to the bar. Steady steps, controlled breathing. Tomas was already pouring. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Fine." "That's Calloway. The Calloway." "I know who it is." She loaded the tray, 6 glasses, carried them back, set each one down without a tremor in her hands. Vincent picked his up without thanking her, took a sip, and set it down hard enough to slosh bourbon onto the white tablecloth. "This isn't Woodford." It was Woodford. She'd watched Tomas pour it from the bottle. "It's the same bottle we always carry, sir. I can bring you—" "Are you calling me a liar?" His voice dropped. The men around him straightened. The couples at nearby tables stopped talking. Forks paused mid-air. Whitney felt the silence spreading outward like a ripple across still water. "No, sir. I'll bring a fresh pour right away." She took the glass and walked away. Behind her, she heard Vincent say to his men, loud enough for half the room, "These people can't even pour a drink right." These people. Whitney set the glass on the bar. Her jaw tightened. Her hands were steady, but something behind her ribs was not. A heat she hadn't felt in 15 years. The same heat she felt in that parking lot on 63rd Street, watching her mother hit the ground. She unclenched her fists, breathed out, picked up the fresh glass. The night was just getting started. The second round of bourbons went smoother. Vincent was talking to his men, laughing about something Whitney couldn't hear, and for 20 minutes she let herself believe the worst was over. It wasn't. The food arrived at 10:15. Steaks, lobster, sides they barely touched. Vincent ate with his hands, tearing bread, dropping pieces on the tablecloth, licking his fingers and wiping them on the linen napkin like it offended him. His men followed his energy, loud, careless, treating the table like a private club where rules didn't apply. Then the drinking picked up. By the 4th bourbon, Vincent's voice had risen to a volume that carried across the dining room. Conversations at other tables dimmed. People started glancing toward the corner booth, then quickly looking away when Ray Dawson's eyes swept the room. Hey girl!" Vincent was snapping his fingers again. "Come here." Whitney walked over. "Yes, sir?" "This steak is cold." She looked at the plate. He'd eaten 2/3 of it. "I can have the kitchen. I didn't ask what you can do. I asked why you brought me cold food." He pushed the plate toward the edge of the table. "Is this how you people eat? Cold scraps off the floor? Because where I come from, we eat like humans." A woman 2 tables away put her napkin down and whispered something to her husband. He shook his head. They stayed seated. They said nothing. Whitney picked up the plate. I'll have a fresh one out in 10 minutes. 5 minutes. And this time, try not to mess it up. I know thinking is hard for someone like you, but give it your best shot. She carried the plate back to the kitchen. The chef, Marco, looked at the 2/3 eaten steak and raised his eyebrows. Calloway? Calloway. Marco fired a new one without another word. Whitney stood in the kitchen doorway and pressed her palms flat against the cold steel prep counter. She counted to 10. Then she counted again. She felt the muscles in her forearms tighten, the same muscles that could throw a palm strike through a wooden board, and force them to relax. When she came back out, Vincent had moved from bourbon to tequila. The table was louder. One of the men had his arm slung across the booth, blocking the aisle. A busboy named Derek tried to squeeze past and got shoved hard into a table. Glasses wobbled. A couple flinched. Watch it, kid. The man didn't even look at him. Whitney delivered the fresh steak. Vincent cut into it, chewed slowly, and nodded without looking at her. She turned to leave. Hold on. He was chewing with his mouth open. I need more napkins. These ones are filthy. He held up a napkin smeared with his own grease and steak juice. Disgusting. Like everything else about this place tonight, including the help. She brought napkins. She brought more bread. She brought a side of creamed spinach he ordered, and then pushed away after one bite, letting the plate slide off the table onto the floor. She refilled waters that were knocked over by careless elbows. She cleaned tequila that Ray spilled, or poured, onto the tile and watched her clean it on her knees. Every trip to that table, the comments got worse. You move pretty fast for your kind. They train you like that, or is it natural, like an instinct? Smile, girl. Aren't you supposed to be happy? Your people are always singing and dancing on TV. Do a little dance for us. Bet you got 3 kids at home and no man to feed them, am I right? That's always the story with your kind. Each line landed like a slap. Whitney absorbed them the way she absorbed punches in training. Acknowledged the impact, controlled the reaction, kept moving. But each one cost her something. Each one scraped away a thin layer of the composure she'd spent 15 years building. She could feel the foundation cracking, feel the heat rising from somewhere deep in her chest. The other staff watched from behind the bar, behind the kitchen door, from the edges of the room. Nobody intervened. Tomas caught her eye once and mouthed, "I'm sorry." A server named Julie offered to take over the table. Whitney shook her head. She wouldn't put someone else in front of that man. She went to Greg, found him in the back office pretending to do paperwork. Greg, I need you to step in. This is out of control. Whitney, I hear you, I do. But that's Vincent Calloway. Do you understand what happens to restaurants that kick out Vincent Calloway? Do you know what happens to the people who work there? He's harassing me in front of your entire restaurant. He's a paying customer, a very important, very dangerous paying customer. Greg's voice dropped to a whisper. Just get through the night. 2 more hours. I'll make sure you get the whole tip, double even. He wouldn't look at her. His pen moved across the page, writing nothing. Whitney stood there for 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked back out to the floor. 2 more hours. She could do 2 more hours. She'd been doing hard things for 15 years. What was 2 more hours? 2 more hours lasted 11 minutes. At 10:46, Vincent decided he wanted dessert. Not from the menu. He wanted something custom, a chocolate souffle that the Meridian hadn't served in 2 years. Whitney explained this calmly. She offered alternatives. She listed every dessert on the current menu, keeping her voice steady, her posture straight, her hands folded in front of her. Vincent listened with his chin on his fist, a half smile on his face, the way a cat watches a mouse explain itself. I don't want alternatives, he said. I want what I asked for. Are you too stupid to understand that, or do I need to use smaller words? Sir, we physically don't have the... Then figure it out! He slammed his palm on the table. Plates jumped. The candle flame flickered sideways and died. That's what you're here for, to serve. That's all your kind has ever been good at. Serving. 300 years of practice and you still can't get it right. The word landed different this time. Serve. He let it hang in the air, let the history behind it fill the silence like smoke. Every person in the room heard what he meant. Some of them looked down at their plates. A few shifted in their seats. An older couple near the window reached for their coats. Nobody spoke. Whitney stood still. Her hands were at her sides. Her breathing was even. But inside her chest, something was coming apart. A wall she'd built brick by brick over 15 years, and she could feel the mortar cracking. "I'll speak with the kitchen," she said. She walked to the back. She told Marco. Marco said no, not with attitude, just with facts. The ingredients weren't in-house. She walked back out. "I'm sorry, sir. The kitchen can't accommodate that request tonight. Can I offer you—"
Vincent stood up.
The booth creaked as his weight left it. He rose to his full 6'3", and the air around the table changed. His men went quiet. Ray Dawson uncrossed his arms and planted both feet flat on the floor. The couples at nearby tables froze mid-conversation, forks in hand, mouths half open. A child at a far table tugged his mother's sleeve, and she pulled him close without looking away from Vincent. "You're telling me no?" "I'm telling you what's available, sir. Nobody tells me no." He stepped around the table, slow, deliberate. He was close now, close enough that Whitney could smell the tequila on his breath, the cologne underneath it, the sweat beneath that. Especially not some little black girl playing waitress in a restaurant she could never afford to eat in. Whitney didn't step back. She held her ground. Her weight shifted, slightly, automatically, onto the balls of her feet. A Krav Maga stance so subtle it was invisible to everyone in the room. But her body knew. Her body was already preparing for something her mind hadn't agreed to yet. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to sit down."
"Or what?"
He smiled. It was the worst kind of smile, the kind that knew nobody in this room would do a thing, the kind that had worked on judges, on witnesses, on cops. "What are you going to do? Call the police? By the time they get here, I'll own this whole block and everyone in it." He reached out and grabbed the front of her uniform. The fabric twisted in his fist. He yanked her forward, off balance, and then swung her sideways, hard. Her back hit the edge of the bar. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Bottles rattled on the shelf behind her. A wine glass toppled and shattered on the floor. The sound cut through the restaurant like a gunshot. 40 people watched. Not one of them moved. Vincent pinned her against the bar with one hand on her chest, his rings dug into her collarbone. His face was inches from hers. She could see every pore, every broken capillary, every year of cruelty etched into his skin. "Fight back, little girl." His voice was low now, almost a whisper meant just for her, but the room was so quiet that every syllable reached the back wall. "Come on, show me something. Scream, cry, beg. That's what your kind does best." Whitney's vision narrowed. She could feel the bruise already forming on her spine. She could feel his rings pressing crescents into her skin. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast at first, hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape.
Then something happened.
The heartbeat slowed. Not gradually, not over time. It dropped. Like a switch flipped somewhere deep inside her nervous system. Her breathing evened out. Her pupils contracted. The pain in her back became information, not sensation. The hand on her chest became a target, not a threat. 15 years of training didn't kick in. That's not how it works. It didn't kick in because it had never left. It was always there. In her posture, in her balance, in the way her fingers curled, in the way her weight sat low in her hips. All it needed was permission. Her eyes opened. She looked up at Vincent Calloway, this man who thought he was the most dangerous thing in the room, and what he saw in her face made his grip loosen. Just a fraction. Just enough. He didn't understand what he was looking at. He'd spent his whole life reading fear in people's eyes. He'd built an empire on it. And what was staring back at him right now wasn't fear. It was assessment. Cold, clinical, practiced assessment. The kind a surgeon makes before the first cut. The kind a fighter makes in the half-second before everything changes. Whitney Torres took one breath, let it out, and moved. Her left hand came up first. Not a swing, not a wild grab. A precise, trained movement. Fingers wrapping around Vincent's wrist where it pressed against her chest, thumb finding the pressure point between the tendons. She rotated his wrist inward, 45 degrees, and his grip on her uniform released like a switch had been thrown. Vincent blinked. In 20 years of intimidating people, no one had ever broken his grip. Not bartenders, not rival dealers, not men twice Whitney's size. And this waitress had done it with one hand in under a second. Before he could process it, her right palm struck forward. Not his face, not his jaw, his nose. The heel of her palm connected with the soft cartilage at the base of his nostrils, driving upward at a 30-degree angle. The way Eli had taught her 1,000 times on the practice dummy. Not hard enough to break, hard enough to blind. Vincent's eyes flooded. Tears poured down his cheeks involuntarily. A biological response, not pain, not emotion, just the body's wiring doing exactly what it was designed to do when the nasal cavity takes a strike. His hands flew to his face. He staggered backward, knocking into a chair that scraped across the tile floor like a shriek. The whole exchange took 1.5 seconds. Ray Dawson was already moving. He came off the booth like a launched missile, 260 pounds of ex-boxer closing the distance in 2 strides. His right fist was cocked, aimed at Whitney's temple. A punch that had knocked out men in bars and back alleys across the South Side for a decade. She didn't block it. She moved inside it. Krav Maga doesn't meet force with force. It redirects. Whitney stepped forward, into Ray, not away from him, and his punch sailed past her ear, close enough to feel the wind on her neck. Her elbow drove into his solar plexus. Not a jab, a piston. She put her hips behind it, rotating her core the way she'd done 10,000 times on the heavy bag at Eli's gym. Ray's mouth opened. No sound came out. His diaphragm had seized. His lungs were empty. He folded at the waist like a closing book, and Whitney stepped past him like he was a turnstile. 3 seconds. 2 down. The third man came from her left. She heard him before she saw him. Chair scraping, shoes on tile, heavy breathing through his mouth. She turned, caught his reaching arm at the wrist, stepped behind his center of gravity, and used his own momentum to send him face first into the bar. He hit the brass rail with a sound that made every person in the room wince. He crumpled to the floor and stayed. The fourth came smarter, low, trying to tackle her around the waist. Whitney sprawled. It was a wrestling defense, not Krav Maga, but Eli had taught her to borrow from everywhere. She dropped her hips, stuffed the takedown, and brought her knee up into the man's chin as he drove forward. His head snapped back. He sat down on the floor like someone had cut his strings. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing anything. 5 seconds total. 4 men down, 1 woman standing. The 5th man didn't come. He was standing at the edge of the booth, hands half raised, palms out. He looked at Vincent, on his knees, face covered. He looked at Ray, bent double, gasping for air that wouldn't come. He looked at Whitney. She was standing in the center of the wreckage, breathing through her nose, hands open and low. Not fists, open palms, ready but not aggressive. Exactly the way Eli taught. You don't fight to hurt, you fight to stop. The moment the threat is over, your hands go down. The 5th man sat back down. The 6th, the youngest, barely 20, was already at the front door, 1 foot outside. Vincent Calloway was on his knees in the center of Chicago's most expensive restaurant. His hands were still on his face. Tears and mucus ran through his fingers. His tailored suit jacket had ridden up around his ears. One of his gold rings had come off and lay on the tile floor, spinning in a slow circle before it settled flat with a soft click. He pulled his hands away and looked up at Whitney through red, swollen eyes. His nose was already swelling. His voice came out broken and wet. "You..." He swallowed. "Do you know who I am?" Whitney looked down at him. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't triumphant or angry or relieved. She was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. The same calm she brought to every training session. The same calm Eli had spent 15 years building into her bones. "You're a man on your knees," she said quietly. "That's all you are right now." The restaurant was silent. Not the polite, uncomfortable silence from before, the silence of people choosing not to see. This was different. This silence had weight. This silence was 40 people trying to comprehend what they'd just witnessed. Then someone clapped. A single pair of hands. The older man near the window, the one whose wife had wanted to leave earlier. He was standing, clapping slowly, tears running down his face. Then another person. Then 3 more. Then the whole east side of the room. Then the bar. Then the kitchen staff who had crowded into the doorway. Marco the chef, 2 line cooks, the dishwasher. Derek the busboy, who Vincent's men had shoved into a table earlier, was clapping so hard his palms were red. The applause built like a wave, first scattered, then steady, then thunderous. People were standing. Julie the server had both hands over her mouth, sobbing. Tomas was gripping the edge of the bar, nodding, saying something under his breath that nobody could hear. Whitney didn't acknowledge it. She walked behind the bar, filled a glass of water, pressed a cold towel to the back of her neck, and stood there very still while the room erupted around her. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, not from adrenaline, from 15 years of waiting for something she'd prayed would never come, and finding out she was ready for it after all. The police arrived at 10:58, 2 squad cars, then a third. Red and blue lights painting the front windows of the Meridian in slow, sweeping arcs. Whitney was sitting on a bar stool when they walked in. She had a towel pressed to the back of her neck and a glass of water she hadn't touched. Her uniform was wrinkled where Vincent had grabbed it. There was a welt forming on her collarbone from his rings. Otherwise, she looked like someone waiting for a bus. Vincent was not sitting. Vincent was on the floor, being restrained by Ray Dawson, who had recovered enough to breathe but not enough to stand, and shouting at a volume that rattled the remaining glasses on the bar. "I'll burn this place to the ground! Every one of you! Every single one of you is going to pay for this! Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do?" The officers cuffed him mid-sentence. He kept screaming as they pulled him to his feet. His nose was purple and twice its normal size. His suit was torn at the shoulder. He looked nothing like the man who had walked in 90 minutes ago expecting the world to bend. Detective Brooke Sullivan arrived 12 minutes later. She was calm, methodical, and unimpressed by Vincent's name. She'd been trying to build a case against him for 2 years. She found Whitney still on the bar stool. "You did all that?" Sullivan looked at the 4 men being treated by paramedics on the floor. "By yourself?" "They came at me. I stopped them." "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "I've been training since I was 13. Sullivan wrote something in her notepad. Then she looked up. "Are you pressing charges?" "Yes." "Good." Sullivan closed the notepad. "Because about 5 people have already sent me video." Greg Patterson appeared at Whitney's side the moment the detective walked away. His face was the color of old paper. His hands were shaking worse than Whitney's. "Whitney, I should have stepped in. I know that. I should have called the police the moment he—" "You should have," Whitney said. She didn't say it with anger. She said it the way you'd state the weather. That made it worse. Greg opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. Over the next 30 minutes, a small procession formed. Customers who had sat frozen in their chairs while Vincent terrorized her now approached one by one. An older woman squeezed her hand and whispered, "I'm so sorry, honey." A man in a gray suit said, "We should have done something." A couple left $400 on their table. No bill, just cash and a note that read, "You are extraordinary." Whitney accepted each one with a small nod. She didn't say, "It's okay." It wasn't okay. 40 people had watched a man assault her, and not one of them had stood up until it was already over. But she understood. She'd spent 13 years understanding how fear works, how it freezes the body, how it convinces the brain that someone else will step in, how it turns a room full of adults into a room full of bystanders. She understood it. She just didn't have to forgive it yet. At 11:30, she changed in the staff bathroom, folded her uniform into her bag, and walked out the back door. The March air hit her face and she stopped on the steps, breathing it in. Tomas was there, leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette he'd quit 3 years ago. "You good, Ghost?" Whitney almost laughed. Almost. "Don't call me that anymore." He nodded, took a drag, blew smoke into the cold air. "What do I call you then?" She thought about it. "Whitney. Just Whitney." She walked to the L station. Same route as every night. Same dark streets, same reflections in store windows. But nothing about this night was the same. And by morning, the whole world would know it. The video hit the internet at 11:47 p.m., 17 minutes after Whitney left the Meridian through the back door. A man named Carlos Vega had recorded it. Table 9, East Section. He'd pulled out his phone the moment Vincent grabbed Whitney's collar and kept it rolling for 93 seconds. The footage was shaky, the audio muffled by distance, but every critical moment was there. The slam against the bar, Vincent's words, and then the swift, surgical dismantling of 6 men by a woman half their size. Carlos posted it to Twitter with 5 words. She had 15 years ready. By midnight, it had 12,000 views. By 6 a.m., 2 million. By the end of the next day, 15 million across every platform. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Someone added subtitles. Someone else set the fight sequence to slow motion with a hip-hop track underneath. News outlets picked it up. Local first, then national. The hashtags arrived like a flood. Hashtag Waitress Warrior. Hashtag Fight Back Little Girl. Hashtag Whitney Torres. Hashtag Krav Maga Queen. Whitney woke up Sunday morning to 412 text messages, 89 missed calls, and her face on the front page of the Chicago Tribune's website. The headline read, "Crime Boss Meets His Match. Waitress with 15 years of Krav Maga takes down 6 men." She sat on the edge of her bed, scrolled through her phone, and set it face down on the nightstand. Then she got up and made coffee. The media wanted interviews. Good Morning America, CNN, Ellen. Local affiliates camped outside her apartment building. Whitney declined every one. She released a single written statement through a lawyer she'd never met before Saturday, a woman named Patricia Wells who'd called Sunday morning and offered her services for free. The statement was 4 sentences long. On Saturday evening, I was physically assaulted at my place of work by a man who believed his power placed him above consequence. I defended myself using skills I have trained in for 15 years. I am grateful to be unharmed. I ask for privacy while the legal process moves forward. That was it. No interviews, no book deals, no reality TV appearances. But the story kept growing without her. Reporters dug into Vincent Calloway's history and found a graveyard. Loan sharking, extortion, witness intimidation, 3 prior assault charges that had evaporated before trial. Business owners on the South Side came forward, dozens of them, describing years of protection payments, threats, vandalism when they refused. 2 women filed reports of assault that they'd been too afraid to pursue. Vincent's empire, which had survived police investigations and federal inquiries, was crumbling because of a 93-second video shot on an iPhone. Eli Whitman gave one interview. Just one. A local news crew found him at his gym in Bridgeport. He was standing on the mat where he'd trained Whitney for 15 years, arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Is Whitney Torres your student?" the reporter asked. "She was my student. Now she's my colleague, and she's the best fighter I ever trained." "Were you surprised by what happened?" Eli thought about it. Surprised she had to use it? Yes. Surprised she could? Not for 1 second. Not since she was 14 years old. The clip went viral on its own. 3 million views. The comments section turned into a tribute wall. People sharing their own stories of standing up, of fighting back, of finding strength they didn't know they had. Whitney watched Eli's interview on her phone, alone in her apartment, and cried for the first time since Saturday night. Not because she was sad, because someone who'd known her for 15 years had finally said out loud what she'd never been able to say about herself. She was ready. She'd always been ready. The state of Illinois versus Vincent Andrew Calloway opened on a Tuesday morning in April, 6 weeks after the incident at the Meridian. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken, media in the back rows, cameras outside. The kind of trial that normally belonged to politicians and serial killers, not a loan shark from the South Side. But the video had changed the math. The whole country was watching. Vincent sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't fit right anymore. He'd lost weight in county lockup. His face was thinner. His rings were gone, confiscated as evidence. Without them, without the entourage, without the bourbon and the attitude, he looked like what he was. A middle-aged man in a chair, waiting to find out how the rest of his life would go. His lawyer, a high-priced defense attorney named Garrett Simmons, had tried 3 times to get the case dismissed. Motion to suppress the video, denied. Motion for change of venue, denied. Motion to reduce charges, Denied. Judge Catherine Blackwell wasn't interested in motions. She was interested in evidence. The prosecution laid it out methodically. The video, played 3 times from 3 angles, Carlos Vega's original footage and 2 security cameras from the Meridian that management had quietly handed over. The footage was devastating. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. Vincent grabbed her, Vincent threw her, Vincent pinned her to the bar. Whitney defended herself. Then came the witnesses: Tomas Reyes, the bartender; Julie Kemp, the server; Derek Collins, the busboy; Greg Patterson, the manager. Pale, sweating, answering every question like a man trying to outrun his own guilt. Each one confirmed the same story. Each one described the same escalation. Each one admitted under oath that they had not intervened. "Why not?" the prosecutor asked Greg. "Because I was afraid of him." Greg's voice cracked. "Everyone was afraid of him." "Everyone except Miss Torres?"
Greg stared at the table.
"Apparently." Then came the witnesses nobody expected. A woman named Diana Cruz took the stand. She owned a dry cleaning shop on Halsted Street. She described how Vincent's men had smashed her front window when she fell behind on protection payments. She'd never reported it. She'd been too scared. After Diana, a restaurant owner named Thomas Holt. Same story, different details. Smashed equipment, threats to his family, 5 years of payments. After Thomas, a woman named Sandra Webb. She sat in the witness chair with her hands folded and described how Vincent had cornered her in a parking garage 2 years ago, grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, and told her if she ever looked at him the wrong way again, he'd make sure she couldn't look at anything. She'd never told anyone. Not until she saw the video. One by one, they came forward. 8 witnesses over 3 days, each one carrying a story they'd been too frightened to tell, before a waitress in a restaurant showed them it was possible to stand up. Garrett Simmons tried his best. He argued provocation. He argued that Whitney was a trained fighter who'd used excessive force. He played the video in slow motion and tried to make her look like the aggressor. Judge Blackwell watched the same video and saw something different. She saw a woman pinned to a bar by a man twice her size who told her to fight back. And then she did. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. All counts. Assault, battery, intimidation, witness tampering from prior cases that the new testimonies had reopened. The judge sentenced Vincent Calloway to 12 years in state prison. When the verdict was read, Vincent didn't react. He sat perfectly still, staring at the table, as if the number hadn't reached him yet. Gloria Torres was in the 3rd row. She'd come every day. She wore the same silver chain she'd given Whitney at 16. When the judge said, 12 years, Gloria pressed her hand to her mouth, closed her eyes, and breathed out. A breath she'd been holding for 15 years, since a parking lot on 63rd Street, since a notepad held up with wired jaws, since she'd sent her 13-year-old daughter up a concrete staircase to learn how to never be helpless again. Whitney sat in the front row. She watched Vincent being led away in handcuffs. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just reached over and took her mother's hand. The circle closed. 6 months after the trial, Whitney Torres stood in a room that smelled like fresh paint and old rubber. The space was on the 2nd floor of a community center in Bronzeville, 3 blocks from her apartment, 5 blocks from the school she'd attended as a kid. It had taken her 4 months to find and renovate with donated materials and weekend volunteers. The floors were covered in second-hand training mats from 3 different gyms across the city. The walls were bare except for a hand-painted sign above the door. Steel Grace. Below it, in smaller letters, free self-defense training for women and girls. All levels, all backgrounds, no exceptions. Whitney had used a portion of the settlement money from the Meridian. Greg Patterson's lawyers had settled fast, eager to make things disappear, to lease the space for 3 years. The rest went into equipment, insurance, and a small salary for 1 part-time instructor. That instructor was standing next to her. Eli Whitman, 67 years old, arms crossed, surveying the room with quiet satisfaction. "Mats are good," he said. "They're second-hand. Mats are mats. It's what happens on them that matters." The first class was a Saturday morning in October. Whitney had expected maybe 10 people. She'd posted flyers at laundromats, churches, shelters, and community boards. 26 women showed up. They came in sneakers and bare feet, in leggings and jeans, in hijabs and ponytails. A nurse who worked nights at Stroger Hospital, a high school teacher from Kenwood, 2 college students, a grandmother who brought her 14-year-old granddaughter, a woman who didn't give her name and stood in the back corner with her arms wrapped around herself, though the room was warm. Whitney stood at the front of the mat. She looked at 26 women looking back at her. "My name is Whitney. When I was 13, someone attacked my mother and I couldn't do anything about it. I've been training for 15 years since that day. I'm here because I want you to have what I have. Not just the technique, but the feeling. The feeling that no matter what walks through the door, you're ready." She paused. "We start simple. We start today. Nobody here is too old, too small, or too late." The grandmother in the third row nodded. The woman in the back corner uncrossed her arms. They began. Eli taught the fundamentals: stance, breathing, awareness. Whitney walked the room, adjusting grips, repositioning feet, showing each woman the same patient corrections Eli had shown her at 13. She stopped at the 14-year-old, the grandmother's granddaughter. Thin, quiet, eyes too serious for her age. "What's your name?" "Alicia." "You ever trained before, Alicia?" "No, ma'am." Whitney looked at her and saw herself. Saw the parking lot on 63rd Street. Saw the backpack she'd thrown at men who were already gone. Saw fists swinging at empty air. "You're going to be great at this," Whitney said. "I can tell." Alicia didn't smile, but she squared her shoulders, set her feet the way Whitney showed her, and threw her first palm strike at the practice pad. Clumsy, off-center, weak. It was the most beautiful thing Whitney had seen in months. After class, the women filed out. Some thanked Whitney. Some thanked Eli. The woman from the back corner stopped at the door, looked Whitney in the eye for the first time, and said, "Same time next week?" "Same time every week." She nodded and left. Eli watched her go. Then he turned to Whitney. "The circle continues," he said. Whitney looked around the room, at the mats, the painted sign, the afternoon light coming through the windows. She thought about a concrete staircase in Bridgeport, a notepad held up by a woman with her jaw wired shut. 15 years of training for a moment she'd prayed would never come. It came. She was ready. And now she was making sure the next girl would be too.